So I'm going to show you how to import Salesforce data into Einstein Discovery. And you may or may not be able to follow along. It really just depends on if you have a Salesforce account and as well if you've got some historical data to work with. And so if you don't have a Salesforce account, you can just follow along and watch this, but I'm going to set up my connection to my own Salesforce instance. And so I'm going to enter in the connection name for my own reference. And the idea behind this is you enter the connection name so you can refer to it later if you have multiple Salesforce instances. So I'm putting my company name here so I know that it's my own instance. And then the login URL will be login.salesforce.com. That'll be the case for the most part. If you're wanting to log into a sandbox environment of Salesforce, you would change this to test.salesforce.com, but I'm going to leave that to default. Then for the username, I'm going to blur this out so that you don't have my username to my org. No offense, but I really don't need thousands of people trying to hack into my system. And then for my password, it is password plus security token. And so let me type that in, and then I copied and pasted my security token on the end of my password there. That's a security measure and authentication measure that Salesforce uses, and so you can look into more information on how to log in using password plus security token, but you'll be familiar with that if you're a Salesforce administrator or developer. If you don't have a Salesforce account and just curious how this works, want to see, then just continue onwards and just watch and not worry about following along. So once I click connect, it'll log me into Salesforce and then it saves the connection here. And so we've got the ability to create new Salesforce environments by clicking new connection here, but I've got the one. I'm not going to worry about doing multiple connections right now. We're just going to focus on importing Salesforce data. And so my own Salesforce org, I actually keep track of reviews of my courses, and then I also have some automation around. If someone leaves me a 3-star or below review, I get an email alert on that so I can follow up and reach out to them and kindly ask them why they think my course stinks. But seriously, sometimes people do accidentally leave like a half-star review, or there's people that genuinely hate what I do. They're the exception rather than the rule, thus I'm still doing these courses. But there's the occasional hater that I try to reach out to and persuade over to the light side rather than the dark side. But I also do genuinely want to know feedback on what I could improve or what the problem is, whether I'm speaking too slowly or too quickly or have too much of a southern accent, etc. So it's impossible to be all things to all people, but I do have a custom object in my own Salesforce instance called review. Now, Salesforce Einstein Discovery automatically tries to discern what are some actionable columns that we want to include in our data set of this data that we're importing. You can click and add additional columns, and these are different fields for these different records in your own Salesforce instance. And then as well, you could reference contact or course name. I'm going to grab the course name so I know what course someone's leaving a review for. I'm going to grab, instead of, well, I'll just keep the date time for created date for the review and not worry about last activity date or last reference or last modified and last views. None of that really matters. Now, you see some Udemy specific things here. I've got my courses on the Udemy platform. You may be watching this course there. You may be watching this course on my own platform or Stack Social. My courses are in a lot of different places, and so I try to keep track of specific things to certain channels. And so let me go ahead and grab by shift clicking and show you how to do some of this. Okay, so you cannot shift click to select multiple. You have to select these individually. But what I want to show is what happens when you reach 12 or more fields. The maximum number of fields allowed is 12. There are 11 fields selected. So I'm going to select a few more. And so now I've exceeded the allowable amount. Now in the full-blown paid version of Einstein Discovery, those limits are expanded greatly. In this free account, Salesforce is limiting us to just 12 or less columns that we can select. And so I'm going to deselect a lot of these. I don't really need to worry about the owner of the review or the record ID. I am interested in the rating, knowing what the score is, but I'm going to remove some of these others that are like specific to a platform. So once you have your columns that you want to select or the fields from your Salesforce data, you click copy data and it creates or imports the data. And so we're importing data from Salesforce into Einstein Discovery. And so we've got our data set now, and it's just named after the object that I pulled in called review. Now, if you want to edit the data set, you can click the down arrow and select edit data set. I'm not going to save the password right now. And now we're getting into some of the area of some improvements, and these are following ways to improve the quality of your data set. And so I wanted to show this as well. Now that we've imported the data, it's saying that the created date column, the date and time are present on the same column, and it's asking what I want to do. This is very powerful data cleanup functionality. Normally you'd have to do this in Excel and mess with removing certain number of characters to the right or to the left, or do some sort of business to clean up your data. But here we can either split to date and hour, or just ignore the time and just keep the date. I'm going to split to date and hour here to show you the functionality of that. As well, before I move onwards to some of these other improvements, some of the highlights or the stats around our data set are that we've got 6 columns and 5,675 rows. The general rule of thumb is that the more rows, the better when it comes to data analysis with Einstein Discovery. And I'm really not sure exactly what the limits are that Salesforce has placed on us as far as the minimum or maximum number of rows that are available. Later on in this course, I'll try and do more than 10,000 rows. I was thinking that the minimum for a data set inside of Einstein Discovery in the free version was 10,000 rows, but obviously I've done this with less than 10,000, so I may have misspoke earlier. And so we'll try and do more than 10,000 here later in the course. So I've split the date and time on the created date, and that in essence gives us another column. For the name field, it's saying that every value is less than 1% of the data. And so if there's a data point that you don't have a lot of actionable data with, you can just drop the column. So I'm going to say, okay, rather than doing nothing, I'm going to drop this column. I also probably need to not reveal the names of my students in this particular course, but I do want to leave the comments. Now in the comments column, every value is less than 1% of the data. Most of the reviews that I get do not add comments. The vast majority of reviews just give me so many stars, and I think I average around 4.6 out of 5 stars. But for the most part, 99% or more of those reviews just give me a star rating, and they may give some feedback about, certain things that certain platforms look for when they're asking for a review. But the vast majority do not leave any commentary or feedback for me. And so I don't want to drop that though. I don't want to drop that column. So I'm just going to select do nothing. Then for the username, also I want to drop that because I don't want to show people's names. And so this is a way of anonymizing the data. A lot of times you redact some data when you're doing data analysis so you can spot trends without outing individual people. And so now I'm going to click apply to make these changes to my data set. And so now we're doing the importing of the data, and we've done some of the cleanup of the data as well. And now we're down to 5 columns and the same 5,675 rows. And remember, this originated from Salesforce, and in the upcoming lectures I'll show you how to import data from like a CSV file or other sources as well. But for now, what we can do is we could do further adjustments to this data set by clicking the trash icon if we wanted to delete one of these, if we wanted to change the type. This rating is a number. I could change that to text, and so you can change these different values. And so for the created date hour, that's the one that we split. You can edit this to just say like hour of day. And probably all these are going to be the same for me because I import my reviews through a nightly batch job in Salesforce. And then let's see if I can change this to a number. Then as well for the created date, we'll just keep that the same. So you could either undo the changes you've made, or I can apply those changes, and Einstein Discovery makes those updates. And then I can also add derived columns, add columns from a lookup table, or create group tables. So for instance, if I wanted to add fields from a secondary data set, I could grab another data set and pull stuff in from it. I'm not going to do that because that's going beyond, importing from Salesforce. You can create group tables as well, and you can do some groupings in order to do more advanced analytics around some of this data. And so now that we've imported this data, I'm not going to create the user story yet because we're going to get into that later on in this course. And we're going to wrap up this particular lecture as it relates to importing data with Salesforce, which was this first icon here. I have got my original data set here, if you notice, when I imported from Salesforce, and then I made some changes which created a new data set for me. So you can have some historical versions here. I'm going to delete this particular Salesforce import, and I'm going to say delete data set and click OK. And so just as a reminder, this AP dist data set was the one that we did through the Trailhead exercise, and now the review data set is one that I did from Salesforce import, and then next we're going to import via CSV. So stay tuned as I show you how to import files via CSV. We kind of covered that already through the Trailhead trail, and you've already done that, but I want to show you some other resources that you can leverage in order to get to other data sets and play around with Einstein discovery and not just be limited to the data that Salesforce provides through Trailhead, but start exploring some additional data sets of your own through some cool third-party websites and platforms that I've found. So stay tuned.